You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com.
But hey, we're going to just keep things moving here, keep everyone on task. Two wonderful ladies, met them backstage. The first is the chair of the derivatives practice group, Patomak Group Partners, and the second is the U.S. Chief Executive Officer of eToro. It's Jill Sommers and Lule Demmissie. Let's put our hands together.
Hello, everyone.
This is fun. Walk-up music is fun.
It is. It is. I was feeling a little bit of the beat.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Lule, for being here. It is a real honor for me to be able to sit down with you today and interview you for this panel, because I think that there's so many interesting topics that we can get into, not just about your background, how you came to this industry, but what eToro is doing now and how that plays into diversity in the industry. So I'm going to give a little bit of your background, just so everybody knows. Lule has a BA in economics from Smith College, an MBA from Columbia Business School, was most recently president at Ally Invest, and has several firms that we all know on her resume. She joined eToro in September of 2021. So she's been there almost 2 years, but so many exciting things have happened in those almost 2 years. And I thought I would first start off asking you about your background, how you decided when you were younger that economics was where you were headed, and what led you to this industry.
Yeah. I am so crazy about this industry. I dropped the other word. When you go to a fintech, you start getting a little bit more informal. So, and I recognize I'm back in the formal crowd. And I am crazy about this industry. So I do have family members who were economists, who were political, and so like the intersection of money and public life is something that's always been interesting for me. But I also come back from a humble beginning where I grew up in a revolution where we lost all our money, and the communist government took everybody's money. And so when we left our country, we had no money. And I have no classic inherited wealth in the sort of monetary value of it. But like so many immigrants have intellectual inherited wealth, right? My parents really focused on education and debate and intellectual rigor as part of our upbringing, and confidence in being able to do that. So that was blessed like that. And so when I came to America, I'm a newly minted American. I'm not really that newly minted. It's been 10 years now. But I'm like gung-ho about being American. I'm gung-ho about capitalism in a responsible way that it should be. So finance made sense to me. It's the bloodstream and the psychology of so many things. And so when I looked around and I started in our industry, nobody looked like me. And I was like, how's that possible? And so I knew that I wanted to become not only an investor in my own name and my own right, but also advance adoption of investing beyond just the Kabbalah that was in it. And so that's been my focus.
That's really interesting. And I think talking to you about it, do you think that there are lessons there that could help us attract other young women into this industry? And what do you think those are, and what could we do better?
Yeah. I mean, part of it is like, there's a reason why I wanted to be an operator. Like, I think that we need to attract people who feel like they can run stuff, not just be a part of the tribe, right? I think that's really important, because just like I think capital ownership, being able to run businesses is an exciting thing for anybody, whether it be a woman or man. So I think one is really just to give them a sense of, like, you too can shape. Mm-hmm. You too can be an operator, and not just a participant. And I think that that's an empowering place to be. Representation obviously matters. That's why I often speak in forums and in public, because I want people to know you can look like me and still be in this space. And I think the other thing is translating the language. Like, when I spent a lot of years in product development. I've been in different parts of the value chain of our business, and one of the things that I realized as a product designer when I used to be in product is that who's in the room determines the focus, what's the major and the minor in that particular product. And I would often hear, women don't want to take risk. They research the heck out of something and then they back away. Mm-hmm. And I actually think options is a phenomenal product for women, because what it does, it's not that women don't want to take risk, and you can't generalize about an entire gender, but just if you will permit me to do so. Ultimately, what I like about options is the ability to calibrate your risk and your, now even more so, your time horizon, right, with the innovations that have happened, and be able to take frequent risks in smaller bites, And I actually think that is very appealing to the female mind. So I think part of it is like designing and speaking about investment products in a way that resonates to their ear, and not necessarily just, language matters. It's like if people sit around just talking about iron condors and butterfly strategies, boom, everybody's down, right, for except the insiders. But actually, all they're saying when they say iron condor is like an orange. So it's like translating, it's not that complicated. It's just they use so much fancy language on top of it. So demystification of the language, mm-hmm. which is something we do a lot at eToro, making sure that we break down stuff, not because you're stupid, but because whoever built this stuff is stupid, right? Like turning it around into language that's accessible, that is going after the actual intellectual thing that's happening, rather than like the navel-gazing of the language around it, right? So those are the kinds of things that I think would be more inviting. And, even if you don't feel strongly about, inclusion as a social cause for yourself, whether we like it or not, the demographics are going where they are. And eToro already has tomorrow's investors today. Our demographic is if you look at the bell curve, majority is millennials. And then the tail ends are really young Xers and older Zs. So we already have tomorrow's investors in our base. And they demand different things, right? They demand simplicity of use. They demand less linguistic blockage points, user experience that's easy and doesn't get in the way. And so we've been really hyper-focused on that. We just recently bought a phenomenal options business that actually does that uses design and breakdown of language in a way that is making it more inviting and intuitive, the concept behind it, rather than, again, as I say, the navel-gazing of the language behind it. So there's some really exciting stuff happening, and I think that our industry, on the option side at least, could also learn from other industries that have been more embraced by culture, right? Right. So if you look at what's happened, whatever your feelings about where crypto is at right now, it's still a really important element of capital formation, right? Whether you feel like it should be regulated or not, that's a point of view concept, but it's still a really important form of capital formation and innovation. And crypto is the number 2 owned asset by women outside of stocks, not options. That's crazy. One of the most really phenomenal instruments to be able to partake in the markets. Yeah. And that's. We can't miss that demographic. That's a business opportunity if you don't even feel any other way. Right. No, I think all of this is so interesting, and I'm going to come back to some of that in a minute, but wanted to maybe get a little bit more in depth, because I think we have talked about how to attract diversity into this industry for a long time.
but there's a number of different ways to think about diversity. And I would love to hear more specifically things that eToro are what you're doing that you think has been successful and where you see some challenges there.
So I'm a little bit unorthodox. I don't think like company strategies around the topic of diversity necessarily move things. I believe in moving individuals and putting programs that are more do rather than show. So, for instance, I was very deliberate to make sure we had a spokesperson bench of people who were talking about investing, which is diverse, because that's the doing, not the saying. And these people going out in the marketplace, going on TV, going in social media, really like dissecting what investing looks like in all of these realms, whether it's in crypto, we have Anna Stone is her name. She's phenomenal in investing, Callie Cox, and other people that we have that are spokespeople. That was a deliberate design choice on my part to be like, we have to do and not just say. We also do things like where our educational content, as I said, is designed by diverse people, all sorts of people, not just about gender and race, but also cognitive sort of approach. Like one of our chief content persons is a stand-up comedian by night, right? So just bringing different cognitive sort of approaches to how we speak and bring people into the tent on this topic has been really valuable. So I believe as an operator, I go to the heart of the design of the system rather than just talking about the aspiration of the system.
Right, and I think to great deal of success so far. So I also think it's really interesting to look at what you talk about as your customer base and looking. You just announced a partnership with Twitter.
We did. So
I think that's another really interesting way that you are going after different demographics. Can you talk about kind of what led you to that partnership?
Yeah, we're super excited about this partnership because it's so, as I call it, on strategy. So eToro, just to give you a little bit of a baseline, it's a global company. It's in about 100 countries. The U.S. business is about 10% of the business. The way that it works, it's a social platform first. So there are 32 million participants in that universe globally, 100 countries, that partake on exchange of ideas and topics about what they've done. On top of that, we've innovated things like what is called copy, which is I can look at your strategy and see if I want to copy it. Or I can follow it as well, meaning, how to see how your portfolio has gone up and down. And the product team has been phenomenal in the way that they've taken the use case all the way to the end, meaning I can track your performance. I can see how your performance does on a daily basis. And so what that does is, to partake in our social ecosystem, you have to be public, meaning you can't talk both sides of your mouth. So we also create sort of what I consider to be like guardrails around our social investing platform so that there is transparency in the participants, right? So for me, like what is so exciting about eToro is like that social platform connected to Twitter, which is, almost 3 million searches of, I don't know if you've heard of cash tags, where you put in the dollar symbol and whatever symbol you want in Twitter that launched at the beginning of this year. Almost 3 million searches a day, something like 500 million searches since the beginning of the year. And Twitter makes sense, right? Twitter is a news and financial news environment. So we partnered with Twitter where you look up a particular symbol, you get a little bit of a preliminary taste on that symbol in the Twitter ecosystem. You can follow people as well in that system. But immediately if you click on eToro, it's almost like a Filodex that expands. You get more on that security or on that digital asset, and then you can decide to partake in our platform, you can practice on our platform. We deliberately designed our platform where the practice environment is the mirror image of the actual environment, which I think sometimes, again, back to the design sort of intention, like a lot of paper trading apps are separate and different from their actual apps. So it's sort of like, so I practiced to ride a bike and then now I'm driving a car? Like, it doesn't make sense to me. So ultimately, we designed it to be the same, so you can practice, you can track other people. So Twitter partnership to us was a very intuitive move.
Yeah, it seems that way, and seems just another kind of exciting thing that you're experimenting with or going into it, and I think plays just so well with everything that you've done so far. I'm going to go back to crypto or the digital asset space because I know that is an area that you you've talked about a lot. And what you were just talking about with women in the crypto space, and I think looking at some of the statistics and data with regard to globally how decentralized finance or different kinds of crypto assets, how they offer, women more economic opportunities. And if you could talk a little bit about that and how you see that playing out in in the future.
So I have a background both in traditional finance, TradFi, and now hopefully, a longer one even in DeFi. I think that the two can be symbiotic together. I don't think traditional finance can solve for larger scale capital formation. So we do need to also allow for an infrastructure and an ecosystem that's thriving for DeFi. So ultimately, to me, what decentralized finance and crypto allows. So first of all, let's just get the demographics, right? So this is actually a lesson for the options industry. As I said, number 2 asset class held by women. Crypto, globally speaking, of the top 10 countries, half of them are developing countries, where brown people live, right? Where you have, in America, African Americans own a large chunk of crypto. Forget about the young who also just have decided traditional is gone, right? And even in the context of high interest rates and, like all industries that are nascent, corrections that must happen, right? Maturation that must happen. We can't judge history by a blimp in time. At the end of the day, it's still an innovation that has to continue. And so I think even within that reality, there's a lot to learn for options when it comes to crypto, which is that it has figured out a way to penetrate culture, not just investing as a heady thing. And why is that important? Now, you can be cynical and be like, oh, Joe Schmo is going to lose everything. You know what? At the end of the day, what we saw this round is that individual investors, yes, they lost, like so many others lost, by the way. Institutional was not any better. But they stuck around and they learned. They said, what went wrong? How do I diversify? How do I think about risk and mitigate risk? And that's what we want, after all, right? We don't want them to run away. So I think that in the context of the now, you can get cynical about digital assets, but it's a really important stream that I think we need to figure out how to get right for our country in general, because it has geopolitical strength that comes with it, but also for capital formation, because what DeFi allows different communities to do is to be able to have the innovation and the digital asset to have capital formation within their communities in a way that a centralized system cannot afford. And so I think if we are looking to have more capitalism, more capital formation, more wealth buoy this planet, as well as, as I said, geopolitical strength in America, I think that it is important for us to keep focusing on maturing crypto.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think a lot of the statistics and some of them, some of the things that you've talked about, that a lot of the people that are investing in digital assets don't trust the stock market, but they trust this new asset class, which leads me to believe this is not going away.
They trust it because it's in their culture. This
right?
is what's the thing about the culture has this thing that the reality is I don't believe in this concept of trust being a singular thing, first of all. I think, one of the things I like about digital assets is in code we trust, right? There's a lot of trust that institutional power also breaks, right? So I think what is more important is that they're learning resiliency and trade-off thinking and input-output, which is so much more mature than just trust from an investor perspective. But you're right, they do trust it more than they do traditional finance.
Right, which is very interesting. So when we think about from the perspective of this isn't going anywhere, we need to figure out what we're going to do as even from a regulatory perspective or from, more of the financial industry embracing this asset class instead of writing it off as it's not viable.
Yeah.
Where do you see the challenges with decentralized finance and TradFi?
Yeah.
In the future?
I think there's a few fronts. So, like from a regulatory perspective, I actually think the New York regulations are some of the best and more solid regulations around crypto. They go at the heart of what the instrument is about. Nobody's having a food fight about whether it's a bird or a fish, right? They go straight to the heart of it, which is like cyber, which is true. It's a digital asset after all.
Right.
They go straight to the heart of it, AML, which is true because dark money could live there if you don't have good AML technology. So the validity of the actual protocol or project, right? So I think one is like just, shaping regulation in a way that is relevant to the innovation. So it's not trapping it, but allowing it to have guardrails to grow. And I think ultimately, as I said, like I'll give you one interesting statistic. Since we launched options on our platform because we purchased an options business, I see a higher correlation between crypto traders and options investors and traders than I do any other correlation.
That is interesting.
This is an opportunity options industry. There is something in the brain of a crypto investor that has some corollary to options. And I don't think it's as simple as saying it's about speculation. I think that is an oversimplification of the diagnosis. So I think that, both there's lessons to be learned out of that industry for options, and there's also warnings to be had that is important for us to take away from.
Yeah, I mean, that is really interesting. And I think on other panels here at this conference, there have been, conversations about crypto and how the industry, looks at crypto. And it's interesting to me that you bring up the New York regulations as...
They're tough, by the way.
Right.
And we just got our license there.
That's great.
We haven't given one for a long time. They're tough. It's not that they're not tough, but again, I want to be regulated to the instrument, right? To the relevance of the instrument, and not, who's fighting over it.
Right. And so when you look at, I don't know if you spend tons of time looking at the way that Washington has been thinking of either not giving any guidance to the industry, what does that do to hinder the growth or,
Yeah, I'm a very pragmatic person. There were other things that were taking up politicians' minds outside of crypto. So I think part of it is just mind share as well, right, in political life. But I have to say, some of the hearings I've been hearing lately, if you've not seen them, they're pretty phenomenal. The level of sophistication and nuance a lot of the representatives are bringing as they ask questions about this industry and shaping and really understanding. Like, as I said, I think if America misses the boat on this instrument, it is like, imagine if we throttled .com during the .com revolution. Does anybody think the American empire would have continued? Right? So I think there's just so much geopolitical prowess in this industry, just like AI, right? That I think people are starting to understand that you can't just bring a hammer to the party. You have to also look at the capital formation part of it and what that could do for our people and our country.
Right. And I think the last panel a little bit got into this, the regulation by enforcement. So people are taking... if there is any guidance to be had through some of these enforcement actions, they want me to do X, Y, and Z, and if I would have done that, I wouldn't have gotten in trouble. So, how do we structure a business going forward that maybe has those elements in it, which is, not really to be recommended in a way that is going to be helpful to the growth of the asset class. Yeah. But I am just wondering if you have any sort of thoughts on how this is going to affect eToro or what you're thinking about with this asset in the future.
So, for us, we're always, we're regulation first. My compliance team was one of the largest parts of eToro when we were standing up the U.S. team. We have some phenomenal compliance and legal bench because we know that we're in a regulated industry. You can't avoid that. And we take that very seriously. We have our broker-dealer license. We have as I said, our New York license. We are in about 46 states now and growing. We have state licensure for our money transmitter business. So we're a regulator up the wazoo. And in the global sense of it, we're in like 11 different regulatory jurisdictions. So it must be. You're talking about people's money, so it has to be regulated. And we appreciate that. Every time we innovate, the compliance person is in the room, right? It's from seed that we understand that you have to think of it that way. I do think, though, as I said, I remember I rewind back, I'm like a gung-ho American. And the promise of America is also making sure that you're building infrastructure that promotes capital formation.
Right.
I don't see that right now.
Right. Right. That's, the part that when you look at this is a little bit deflating, that there doesn't seem to be much change in the thought of how we can...
I'm not deflated, though. 3 brothers,
That's good.
Born into a revolution. Bring it on.
That's great. That's great. Well, one last question, and then we can move to any questions from the audience. There's so many different topics that Lule can answer or talk about from her background or from what she's doing now at eToro. But I just wanted to ask you, when you look at the future for this industry and you look at, the title of this panel, Building Diversity for a Stronger Future in the Industry, what are the most promising things that you think we can look to for the stronger future of the industry?
So we are lucky in the sense that I think that the American ethos and DNA is designed around this idea of celebration of ownership in capital markets. And so I think what's promising to me is that that's still thriving, although I hope for a more welcoming regulatory environment over time. But that's still in the DNA of America. And then on top of that, you see this sort of demographic shift that's happening in America, right? So I think the opportunity for our industry is to figure out the synergy between the two so they both thrive. So to me, that's the exciting adventure. And, although, it's easy to use diversity as a trigger word, I like to do, not show. I like to really do, not show. And I think that it's time for all of us to do that, whether, as I said, it's because that's the world you want to shape or whether you recognize that that's the business of the future.
Well, it's very exciting to hear you talk about this because I think that you have done exactly that. So thank you so much. I'll open it up for questions if anybody in the audience has questions for Lule.
Does that work? Oh, yes. Well, first of all, thank you so much for being here. It's fascinating to hear your perspective on things, and your enthusiasm is contagious, and I love that. So I'm just curious, you're doing a lot, it seems like, at eToro, and maybe if you could highlight for us one or two of your sort of favorite accomplishments or things you've been able to bring across the finish line that are really working and are really connected to the goals that you've talked about today?
Yeah. It's a few fronts. So I'll take it like from the back end to the front end, the sexy stuff, right? So from the back end, I'm just so proud we were able to have built, because when I came, we were building from ground zero on certain bench sort of strengths. So I'm really proud of the team we've built. We're about 100 people in the U.S. now, and I call my legal and compliance and risk team my Avengers. It was really important for me to build a team that had the ability to understand the laws and regulations, but also the agility to know how you allow us to innovate, because we are often crafting ground that doesn't exist yet. And so that's been one of the proudest moments for me. Like, I have such a phenomenal bench. Don't you dare try to steal them. But the second is really being able to engage with regulators through the front door and not just through the hammer door, to be able to say, this is what we'd like to do, like, whether it's copy or advancing the copy technology capabilities, whether it's social investing, to really engage them to say, listen, without fintech innovating, you're not going to have inclusion. So if your goal is to protect the retail investor, make sure that they're being not just protected, but included, you can't just ice us out, right? And so being able to engage regulators and innovating on some of the stuff that eToro does globally and bringing it here, whether it's copy or otherwise. And then lastly, it's just our persona, as I said, bringing a diverse set of voices and being able to talk about investing in a way that's irreverent. Irreverence is really important for the next generation. They don't trust people who are all buttoned up and not real. So that is irreverent, but knows its stuff, right? It knows their technical sort of understanding of where the industry is and the instruments that they research and have expertise on. Those are the three things that I feel has been an exciting thing to accomplish while I've been here.
All right. I just have a follow-up. So I know you'll laugh at this, Jill, but hearing you say that, so I don't think of creativity and irreverence being in, high supply at regulators. So tell me about those conversations and sort of how you're bridging the gap of bringing these creative ideas to, a set of professionals who do a great job trying to protect investors and make sure the right things are in place. How do you bring them along with you? Yeah,
that's a great question. Thank you for asking that. So I was born in Ethiopia, and by the time I was 16, I grew up in 4 different countries, 3 different continents. It's a lot of new friendships to make. And that period in time formed a lot of my outlook on life, which is that when you go to somebody's house, you don't tell them their baby's ugly. Right? You first get to know what they are, where they're coming from, their intentions, and most people are not bad actors, right? Most people, they just have their own lens. So when we engage regulators, I don't go in and say, look how stupid you are, right? But rather to understand the intent with which they come to what they do. And what I have often found is most of the time, when you do that, their ear opens up to what you are trying to establish as well. And having the bona fides of the people we have on our bench who they also trust from their institutional background was important. So that's kind of how we've approached it, is to you get more permission to push and stretch when you don't go in first telling people their baby's ugly.
Such good advice. Any other questions from the audience? Jim, I knew you'd have a question.
Can you explain? I wasn't sure I was understanding the use case that crypto has in capital formation, how it's better than what the traditional finance offers, and I don't know if I understood that correct. Could you give an example of how it's a better option? And I don't know if you were saying in undeveloped communities or what, but at the local level, why is crypto a better vehicle for capital formation than traditional finance?
So thank you for that question, because I actually think a lot of people who are in crypto don't get held up accountable for that. So I'll just give you a few use cases, right? So I think that stable coins are a really interesting part of the crypto landscape, and I think they're ripe for some interesting regulation that's already been proposed, right? So a stable coin, 90+% of stable coins is pegged to the dollar. So if stable coins grow, the dollar grows, right? Ultimately, the hegemony of the dollar grows. So what a stable coin, as you know, does is it allows me to digitize the dollar in a way that makes it more accessible on an app, for example. So let's say I am in the corner of the world where I can't access a dollar, but I can download the app that's pegged to the dollar. that allows me to have stability in transaction in my community, that trusts that transaction more than they do my local currency, as an example. That's just one example. I can keep going. I'm going to give you a second example, but they'll keep on going with more. We have a nonprofit at eToro called the Good Dollar, which is essentially a protocol and a project that is a nonprofit, and if you buy a good dollar as the buyer of the good dollar, what you get is if the good dollar goes up and down, right? So let's say that good dollar goes up 5% or 10% for the year. The contract is designed such that you don't get 10%, but you get 5%. On the other side of the good dollar is people in Nigeria, in Malaysia, in Indonesia that are minting good dollars and getting it as universal income. The good dollar is a digital dollar, which means that digitization of that currency means those people can connect to those people in their country. So suddenly in Nigeria, there are members of communities that are members of the Good Dollar Project that are not only getting good dollars, but now connect a network to create businesses in their locality, even if it's off the protocol of Good Dollar. So suddenly you've created communities that can create capital formation ideas. So this is just 2 projects I'm telling you about. So the more projects there are like that, the more you're essentially unlocking human capacity in a way that a singular path of ACH, bank, et cetera, as we've seen so far, right? It's happened in this industry, cannot accommodate. It's a single highway. I'm not actually saying that DeFi, traditional finance goes away. I'm saying the globe is way too big for it to take care of everything. We need DeFi as a complementary force. Hopefully that's helpful.
All right. Well, thank you all so much. Lule, thank you for being here today. This was a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions@theoptionsinsider.com.